I'm going to be talking about the ActBlue scandal, something that's being investigated at a national level right now by the U.S. Congress. But first, I need to give you a little bit of background because I actually did this video a year ago as the scandal initially broke and people started to figure out that there's something really wrong here with ActBlue and the financial funding arm of most leftist causes in America today. I'm going to call this the part 2 because essentially I went through this last year. Now, I am going to repeat a little bit of the slides that I had in that video previously, mainly because I want to give you the proper background. Recognize that not everybody watching this video today probably saw that one. So let's just get right into it. So the first question, of course, is what are we talking about with an ActBlue scandal? And essentially, we're talking about this group right here. This is kind of their front page. And they essentially function, they are a group called ActBlue. And this organization was founded in 2004. And essentially, it's a fundraising processing platform that's a conduit for small dollar donors. It's a way for people to donate, say, $100, and they spread it out among, say, 50 candidates or 100 candidates or however they want to split it up. At least that's the theory as to what it was set up for. And ActBlue, as its name kind of implies, it really only supports leftists. Now, because it was successful, the Republicans do have something that's sort of similar called Win Red, but ActBlue dwarfs Win Red and makes it look like a joke in comparison to both its size and how it functions. Now, when I did this video a year ago, they had processed about $19 billion for the Dems in the previous 18 years. It's actually much larger than that now. And of course, they are the largest political fundraising platform in America today. They're huge. I mean, it's massive. But the question is, so what? Nothing illegal about that and nothing illegal about ActBlue existing. They had approval from the FEC for what they were doing as they got started a number of years ago, 20 years ago now. So what's the problem? Now, and basically, from a conservative perspective, you say, hey, I don't like ActBlue because it exists to keep these guys in the money. I mean, if you look at any campaign finance report, FEC, or at the local state level, like the Public Disclosure Commission, you will see reports that clearly show all these donations coming in through ActBlue. So people on the right, the conservative side of folk, we're not going to be happy about ActBlue, but that's not the problem, nor is it the scandal. There are two essential problems that the current scandal and investigation into ActBlue are attempting to look at. One is that it is actually illegal to launder cash or conceal the true source of funds. So you can't go out and take some of your money and hand it off to a bunch of people that basically allows them to contribute and conceal the true source of those funds to a political candidate or a political cause. It is also illegal to give over-limit contributions. So both the federal and local levels in most states, they basically restrict how much money, the total amount of money that you can give to a candidate. So that basically encourages political candidates to spread out their fundraising efforts, try to get a lot of people to come in and fund them. And ActBlue fills a pretty critical niche for candidates and makes it a lot easier for them to raise those funds. So let's just say you're Bob Ferguson here as a good local example, current Attorney General and future Washington State Governor, for example. Now let's just say you're one of Bob Ferguson's classic supporters here and you really like Bob Ferguson. But you want to give money to Bob Ferguson and perhaps some other people, and you want to make it easy. So you're going to send your check or your payment through, usually it's an online payment of some kind, and you send it to ActBlue. And then ActBlue, in turn, sends that money over to ActBlue or to Bob Ferguson, and they basically report it so everybody knows what happened. Nothing wrong. This is perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with this. But here's where you get into shady stuff. What if there's people who want to give money to him, like Sam Bankman-Fried, the recently jailed FTX guy last year who was committing massive fraud and admitted that he was basically violating every campaign finance law ever existed? Or maybe it's George Soros, who's been a massive donor to Democrat causes and wants to conceal the true source of the money he gives. Or you're a big corporation, or maybe you're a Mexican drug cartel entity, or perhaps you're just a Ramtha, the super secret 35,000-year-old Lemurian warrior spirit, and somehow you want to funnel money to get to Bob Ferguson. So you're going to send it through ActBlue, but you want to make it so that people can't tell that money's coming from you. And as it turns out, this is not legal. This is actually completely illegal. You have to actually reveal the true source of these funds. They can't just give it to ActBlue and call it an ActBlue contribution. They have to say, no, it's Ramtha, or it's Pfizer, or it's Soros, or it's the Mexican Sinaloa drug cartel, whoever it is, and they're wanting to fund Bob Ferguson because he's their best friend. The other thing that you'll see when you're actually looking at these types of problems, and this is actually, I think, the bigger one, is what happens when you have clearly an unknown source of funding. And they basically smurf those contributions using that perfectly legitimate donor who gave a $10 contribution one time to Bob Ferguson. But instead, suddenly, it turns out they are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to Democrat causes and candidates all over the country, despite the fact that he's unemployed and hasn't had a job in 4 years and lives in a cardboard shack down on the waterfront. That's probably going to be illegal too, and that's definitely evidence of some shady activity and some problems that are going on with this type of operation. So the question is, how did they get caught? I mean, this is a big multi-billion-dollar project. There's all kinds of money flowing in that's perfectly legal into political campaigns all the time. What really triggered ActBlue to get caught? And I confess, I actually remember looking at some problems with ActBlue years ago when I worked at the Freedom Foundation. This would have been back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe, and there were things that just didn't make sense, but I also didn't have access to some of the same data and tools that we have today. But the first person, I think, who really blew it out of the water was last year with James O'Keefe here, basically uncovering very clearly strange money laundering, or at least what looked like money laundering operations. And he was simply doing this by going down the ActBlue list of donors to certain political causes and saying, going up to their house, and they live in a ramshackle building, and he goes and talks to the 85-year-old lady there who suddenly, despite the fact that she has no idea, she apparently gave $287,000 to a bunch of causes last year, and she never knew it. That is suspicious, even in Democrat land and even in a big leftist fundraising operation like this. Something's wrong. And he didn't just do it once. He did it in multiple states all over the country. And it initiated a lot of other groups and a lot of other people to start checking into the ActBlue contributions as well. We started doing that here in Washington State last year around the same time that I did that video. So this is kind of what triggered it and got it going. Now, what I decided to do is I thought, well, I'm just going to go down and start filing a complaint on the specific violations and initiate a Federal Election Commission investigation, just like I do. And anybody who's followed me at all, and you can see my link down below. I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, not quite 1,000 times yet, but I'm getting close, and caught hundreds of violators in Washington State who violated Washington State's campaign finance law. So why not file a complaint with the feds? It's going to be a little different process, but something similar. At least it kind of forces them to eventually go down the rabbit hole and figure out what's going on here. This is a good question because this is what I was starting to work on last year, and we ran into a roadblock. And I'm going to point everybody, if you want to, over here to Bill Brooks' Substack. He's written on this subject here a couple times. He's a Republican election integrity guy based out of Skagit County, which is a few counties north and just one county, or actually two counties south of the Canadian border. And Bill Brooks actually been doing yeoman's work, just kind of writing some articles in his Substack. And he's gotten into some of the details here. But essentially, I'm going to repeat what he said, but a little bit more, outline it here a little bit clearer as to the problem that we ran into. And essentially, what it boils down to is this. You have this historic data set that you can look back on campaign contributions, say, between 2017 and 2022. Now, that's set in stone. These campaigns are long over. Whatever the contributions were made, they were done, right? There's nothing really to update and change on it. Now, maybe you have somebody that realizes they made a mistake in a historic file, and they might make a little bit of a change. I've looked at these databases many, many times at the state level, and it's very rare the historical data swings that much. Once it's set in stone, campaign's over, the last reports are filed, that information doesn't usually change. However, in the FEC ActBlue databases, if you actually download that information in this 5-year window period of time, massive multi-million, thousands of donation contribution changes are constantly happen multiple times a day. We've downloaded the data every single day for the last year and a half. sometimes multiple times a day, depending on the amount of time that volunteers have had to download this data, and it never matches. It keeps constantly changing. Why is this a problem? Well, it makes it very difficult when you file a complaint, because essentially this is what happens. Hey, I've documented my complaint. Mrs. Jones here, who couldn't afford to buy a bus ticket, and she's 95 years old, somehow gave $400,000 to a whole bunch of different causes over a few years. Something's wrong. Looks like money laundering. Maybe the FEC should get involved. Well, by the time the FEC takes their sweet time, a couple years, to probably look into that complaint, the database has been changed so many times, nothing in my original complaint matches what the data is that the FEC is going to look at to make sure I'm not a flake and that my information is correct. They're going to say, hey, those numbers don't match. They throw out the investigation. This is a brilliant way to cover up and conceal any kind of fraud or basically money laundering operation that you might have in the campaign finance world. And because of the sheer volume of what's going on, it's obviously some kind of an AI program or an automated program at that basically keeps making these historic changes, just constantly churning in the FEC database. And they are well aware of it, and the FEC has willfully, I believe, especially over the last 8 years, just decided to ignore it and pretend like nothing to see here. It's a real problem, and because of that, you can't really go in and file a complaint. Now, of course, if you did, then you have people like this saying, hey, see, I told you, there's nothing to see here. Just because it looks like fraud, just because it acts like fraud, just because every aspect of it looks like fraud, until you get down to the original source bank accounts and find the original source of the mystery funds, you're never going to get to the bottom of the scandal or the problem. So basically, again, this issue has popped up, I think, because of just this steady, continuous work that people have been doing, trying to figure out what the heck's going on here with ActBlue. There's articles like this one here about these investigations. This is just from a few months ago about looking at laundered, fraudulent political contributions that are coming through. So something's clearly wrong, and that's actually led here to officially a federal congressional investigation and subpoena of ActBlue records at the congressional level. Now, here's the thing. This is not enough. This is a start. And the reason why I say that is that anytime you have a weaponization of fraud or money laundering or something on one side of the political spectrum, inevitably what happens is the late kids to the party, which in this case the Republicans, they're going to come up with their own way to kind of match that volume and level of cheating. And it looks to me like WinRed is starting to implement something very similar to the ActBlue fraud or money laundering operation that it looks like that we're seeing on one side. So what happens if enough of these politicians who are supposedly looking into this feel like they can't get away from the fact this has been an easy way to get a bunch of cash? Are they really going to follow through with this type of investigation? I sure hope they do, because it's probably not limited to ActBlue, but ActBlue is the biggest one in the country, and it's the most obvious, and we do need to get to the bottom of it. But it's going to take a wholesale, massive federal investigation, because this is giant and huge, and it's going to impact all these powerful, politically connected people who have essentially been able to utilize this funding source to get into political office. Now, here's the thing. Timidity, as I've mentioned many times in the past, is not going to be the path to political success. It isn't. We need to give support to those in D.C. and elsewhere who are actually looking into this and keep sharing this story further and wider and make it as public as we possibly can. There is something really bad and fraudulent and dishonest at the core of this investigation, and it has a big impact, I believe, locally as well as nationally. But timidity is not going to be the path to political success. So I couldn't file those complaints because they just weren't going to go anywhere with the way the database was that we saw. But now that we've got so much data, we've been able to provide this to the feds. I'm hoping at some point in time, various people, we're going to keep feeding this up to this investigation back in D.C., and we'll see how it rolls out here locally. But remember, if you really want to make a big difference politically, you have to get involved. You have to show up. There's no other way to do it, and a lot of you have been showing up helping on this and other issues as well. So I just want to remind people, even in big stories like this, it starts local, starts small, and it starts with people like you and I willing to show up because, as I've always said, the future belongs to those who show up.